Hello, I'm Professor Lieu. Welcome to our live stream. Today we are critiquing your artwork. We have three pieces by Isabella Davis. We have a 3D mixed media piece by Tyler Hanna and an embroidery piece by Mallory Waldinsperger. Really cool, diverse range of media being represented tonight. If you would like to grow as an artist, but you can't afford an art class, we've got everything you need here at Art Prof, critiques and tutorials. We are going to get started with this self-portrait by Isabella Davis, and her artist statement is in the video description below, so if you guys want to take a look at it, feel free. Isabella talks about how in this acrylic painting, she's trying to create an abstract background, but instead of using brushes, she actually used her hands and fingers to create the spontaneous thoughts of color. And what she's trying to do in the piece is to create a calm, meticulous figure done in oil paints to contrast against a crazy background. And she talks in her statement about how she paints a self-portrait every single year to see how much she's improved from the years before. And the theme she's trying to communicate is how it's really difficult sometimes to think clearly with all the worrisome things that are going on all around you, and how one of her big personality traits is to try and remain positive despite difficult situations. She's trying to document her technical improvement and develop meaning in her work so that viewers can grasp it. All right, well, let's dig into this piece then, Isabella. My first thought is that good for you for submitting again, because she says in the statement, I'd already submitted, but I recently completed a new piece, was hoping I could get feedback on how to improve upon. And it seems to me from the statement that improvement is a real initiative of yours, Isabella. And I really want to emphasize that because I do believe as a teacher that improvement is something you really can take control of. You can't always control the results, but I think having a mindset of wanting to improve and taking visible action to actually make that happen is really, really good as an artist, to have that mindset of wanting to constantly improve yourself. So the first thing that I'm noticing, there's some really just exquisite details in this piece. And so, for example, not only do we have so much layering and such a really wide range of different marks in the background, but I have to say, this portrait is beautifully painted. I think that especially in the cheekbone area, I would say surrounding the mouth, there's so many, I think, really subtle decisions that are going on in this painting. And I have to say, I really appreciate the feeling of skeletal structure underneath everything, because what I typically see very often when I'm looking at portraits, people get very fixated on the eyes, nose, and mouth for good reason, because that's really, I think, what we connect with. But the thing is, the success of the eyes, nose, and mouth, in my opinion, really rests in establishing the skeletal structure. And it's really the forms that surround the eyes, nose, and mouth. Those are really the forms that matter. And so the thing about Isabella's piece is if you take away the eyes, nose, and the mouth, you're still left with a really sculptural, fleshy form. And that really impresses me because I think a lot of people, they get so stuck on eyelashes and the pupils, and the eyes are so well painted. Like, especially one thing that I really notice is that the whites of the eyes, so often I see people literally making them white and they look weird. It almost looks like your eyes are glowing or something. And I can see that in Isabella's painting, she's actually looking at the shadow that's being cast on the eye, and she's really taking note of the roundness of the eyeball. A lot of people don't show that. So there are some beautiful decisions that honestly, I think it's just really good observational skills. Because the thing is, Isabella has clearly really good painting skills, but you know what's even more important is her observational skills. That's what makes the painting skills actually possible. Oh, very cool. We have Isabella in the chat with us live. I love it when the artist is here live because I can always ask more questions. It can be a little bit more of a back and forth. Annie Helgeson says, slight abstraction, especially around the edges, reminds me a lot of Alpe Effe's work. I'm not familiar with that artist, so I'll have to take a look at that later on. Okay, so let's get back to Isabella's piece. And I have to say also, really nice job on the hair. I think the hair has a certain degree of mass to it that I think is really good. I do think that the lighting is a little bit less clear than it is on the face. Like the face, it's so consistent. Like you really can read the cast shadows. You can really get a great sense of the reflected light. That's like the really subtle light that's on the side of the shadow. But the thing is, the hair, I feel like the contrast could be heightened a little bit because if I only look at the hair, the shadows are not quite as concrete. So I think that's an area where I actually would beef it up, maybe more than it actually looks in real life. Because here's the thing, you guys, if you paint from observation, this is going to sound very strange. You can't aim to paint things as they are. Because you know something, it always ends up being almost a watered down version of reality. So when I paint from observation, I really think about how do I heighten this reality? And usually that's like the bare minimum, especially with figure drawing. Some of you guys were watching me draw live the other night. You probably noticed that I tend to exaggerate angles. I make things a little bit more tilted than they really are. And I think that's really to compensate for things getting very stale very quickly if you just try to draw things as they are. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Okay, so Isabella, I think what I'd like to really get into is the relationship between the background and the figure, okay? They're clearly very different from each other, but the thing is, the way that you describe it in the artist statement, you talk about how thinking clearly within worrisome things that are going on, staying positive in a difficult situation, okay? So that basically means that if that's the theme, I have to look at that pattern and I have to recognize, oh, this is a difficult situation. So the question is, how do you visualize that? So yes, it's more chaotic, that's for sure. But I think the issue that I have with it is that the imagery is strongly reminiscent of flowers. And I don't think a lot of people think about flowers as being a difficult situation. I mean, it really depends on the context. But the thing is, the way that the roses are drawn, they look decorative. They're not exactly realistic looking flowers. And so because they look decorative, if you think about, okay, decorative flowers, that tends to be something that's a little bit prettier, that's a little bit easier to present. And then the other thing that I think is a big clue is the color scheme of the background. Color scheme of the background is pretty bright. There's a lot of white in there, and a lot of the colors are fairly playful looking, pretty saturated. And those are not really the types of colors that I think a lot of people would associate difficult situations with. So I would just say, if I'm not reading your artist statement, I don't think I would read that background as a difficult situation. I would say it looks dense and it looks like there's a lot of layers going on in there, but I don't necessarily read it that way. Slepnir says, I like that you off-centered the composition. Yep, it's such a relief to look at a portrait and not have the figure right in the middle of the page. It's just great to see that. Sydney says, I didn't really get that the background was abstract. At first, I thought she was standing in front of a shower curtain. However, your technique is amazing. Very nice. Annie Helgenson says, almost wish there's a little more color cohesion and relation between the portrait and the background. Well, you could say that, except that I'm guessing, Isabella, that you're really trying to show contrast. Like you're trying to show, look at this figure, they're so calm and controlled within the chaos of that, okay? Now, on the flip side, not only do you need to make the background more harrowing looking, you also have to do the same thing with the figure. So it's almost like you have these two things and they're different, but you got to make them more different. Like you got to really drive this concept forward. Because here's the thing. If we go up close and we look at the face, okay, they look like a fairly calm person. But you're talking about staying calm in a tough situation. And that's not really the same thing. Like, this to me seems like somebody who is really at rest. And I think part of it is that there's no real tension going on in the image. Like, she just seems so relaxed. And I think that you can be calm in a situation, but you can also convey a little bit of tension. I have definitely had moments like that in my classroom. Like, there was this one time, this was a long time ago, but I had a student who screamed at me in front of the classroom, like top of their lungs, yelling at me. And I knew in that situation, I was like, okay, gotta stay calm, because as the teacher, I can't yell back. That's really, really bad. And so I just said to them really, really quietly and calmly, I said, okay, you and I can talk about this later. So I stayed calm, but the thing is, it wasn't like a calm that was so relaxed. Like, I really had to try hard to deal with that situation in a professional manner. So I think that you're getting the calmness, but it needs to have a little bit of tension. Like, we got to feel that something's not quite right going on in here. So I would recommend thinking about something like that. And I would also say that you got to rethink this transition between the bottom of the shirt and as it goes into the background, because I really get the feeling that you chickened out a little bit in that area. You can admit it or not, it's up to you. But that's the impression I'm getting, is that you had a very clear vision of what you want to do with the face. You knew what you wanted to do with the background. And then you got to the bottom and went, ugh, what do I do now? Oh, okay, I'm just going to cover this up. And, something doesn't work that way. You really have to address that. And so you could think about, okay, well, maybe she's losing, okay? Maybe there's a piece of her that is starting to give in to this chaos. Or you could say, you know what? Maybe she is holding strong. She is clearly defined. She is not a part of that background. I think the thing is, no matter what you guys are working on, I think it's very important to be very decisive about things, because when you try to just hope that nobody notices, someone's going to notice. So I would definitely say that's an area to reconsider. The other thing is that the clothing, it's pretty similar in value to the background. So, for example, one thing that I oftentimes do with an artwork, if I'm trying to figure out, okay, is this really working in terms of value, is I'll put it into Photoshop and I'll just turn it into a black and white image. Now, if I do that, guess what shows up the most? It's the hair. The hair is actually the part of the painting with the strongest presence. But the thing is, the hair is not really that important in the scheme of things. It's really the facial expression and the chaos around that. So here's a very simple thing that you could do. This sounds like a really shallow comment, but trust me, I'm trying to get somewhere with this. So here's the thing. The hair is beautifully painted, but the thing is, it's a distraction. And so why not put your hair up so that way we really look at the contour and facial expression? Those are the kinds of things that you really have to think about in advance for a self-portrait. And actually, I don't know if you're aware of this, Isabella, but Rembrandt, he really was the king of self-portraits. I don't know that there is any other artist in art history that did as many self-portraits as he did. And you'll notice that in all of his portraits, there's different decisions. Like this one, he's wearing a hat. This one, he's wearing a hat, but it's like a mushy hat. And he looks almost whimsical and silly. You look at this one, he seems a little bit more standoffish, and yet he's making eye contact with you. And in this one, he seems really, really distant. And so I would say, don't underestimate what your decisions about your hair and your clothing are going to have on the actual self-portrait. I think that's really, really important to be thinking about that. So I think that you've got the technique. Like, I am not worried about your painting technique. I mean, if there's anything I would think about to get better with the figure painting, it's not so much your brushwork. Your brushwork is quite good. I think it's a color thing. I think that the colors you're using, they're pretty straightforward, very literal. If you look at, for example, we were just looking at these Rembrandt paintings. If you look at them, there's all kinds of weird colors in there. There's greens, there's blues. It's really hard to see in the slide, but if you go to a site that has really high resolution images, you'll be shocked at the strange colors that are in there. And so I would just say really try to get more adventurous with it, because I think the risk is that the color becomes a missed opportunity and you're not really able to engage with it as much as you possibly can. Let's see. Albert says, feels like an early Alice Neal. Okay. And Isabella says, I was watching a Rembrandt master copy painting while painting this. Oh my God, that is so funny. This is like totally serendipity. That is really, really cool. So anyway, I think another thing you could consider for that background, especially because I think you were working with acrylic, is to think about working with more textured paints, paints that are thicker. This is a really cool mixed media acrylic painting tutorial that Lauren Welch does. She does all kinds of weird things with the paint. She mixes coffee grounds in with them. There's a point where she puts all her paint into a plastic bag and starts piping it like cake frosting. Really beautiful sculptural qualities. And I feel, Isabella, that maybe something more dramatic like that would have a bigger impact. And then I would go over and take a look at Lauren's Instagram, because we really see her. She's a teaching artist here at Art Prof. She's the queen of pattern. We all go to her for patterns. And I think given that you are working with patterns and that we're thinking about ways for maybe the background to get more chaotic, that maybe Lauren would be a really good person for you to look at as an influence. Let's see. Builder D says, I'd be interested how it would look if the background was dark and merged into the hair, but super saturated. Yeah, there's a lot of options. I mean, Isabella, I don't know if you do thumbnail sketches or even like mini paintings. Sometimes that's a nice little painting sketch that you can do. If you don't do that, I really recommend it, because I think that it's a great idea. It's just you need to explore more options, because I feel like some things aren't quite lining up right now. All right, let's take a look at Tyler Hanna, who is our next artist. And Tyler has a piece which is mixed media, in case you couldn't tell. Tyler is a high school senior from Canada, and creating this model, they used paper mache to cover their actual face. Tell me in the chat if you guys have ever done that before. The first time I did that, I was in 6th grade, and my poor art teacher had like 25 6th graders like running around with Vaseline on their faces. It's like, wow, she must have been such a brave teacher for running that class. It was super fun though. I mean, we had a great time doing that. All right, so Tyler talks about how the process of making the piece was really sporadic, reflecting on time in their work. They feel blind to what the future holds in regards to their pathway, and that this piece is an outlet for their brain to ooze out what's being held captive inside, and that he thinks everybody's going to have a different theme and everybody's going to ponder it in a different way. Tyler also says in the statement, it's in the video description below, that some days he sees chaos and destruction, other times he sees his imagination set free, and nodded to different social issues such as technology becoming a physical extension of who I am. The addition of the Tylenol bottle hints at medication used to solve our mental issues. Want viewers to explore my piece, decipher the meaning, leaving them with an expanded view on the way they see people, words, nature, technology, and emotion. And by the way, Tyler says that all the materials used were items found in their room that they've connected with throughout their entire life. Okay, and by the way, in the video description, Tyler has a rather entertaining video that you guys might want to check out in terms of how Tyler actually made the piece. Okay, so we're taking a look at Tyler's piece. So here's a side view. Here's a front-on view. Now, first thing is logistical. I would say that you guys, if you work three-dimensionally, you have to take really good photos. This photo is pretty good. I think that the lighting could be better, but what I like about this photo is that the background is nice and clean. That's not so much the case with this one. This one, there's like a ray of light in the background. There's a rug on the floor. 3D art is hard to photograph well, and it's not easy for anybody. But what I recommend, Tyler, is that you go to artprof.org and I would click on tutorials and find our art school portfolios guide, because we have a whole article in that section on how to photograph 3D artwork. It's not difficult to do if you know all the tricks. The thing is, though, you got to know all the tricks. And most people do not know what the tricks are until you talk to somebody who does. So I'd really recommend you do that, because the thing about 3D work that I think drives everybody up the wall is that it can really be misrepresented. If the photograph isn't good, you can make an artwork look so different depending on the photo. So I would just recommend that you take a look at that page, because I think this photo as well doesn't look great for the sculpture. So I would say out of the three, this is the one that I think is closer to what I think is going to look better. Oh, Tyler, you are live in the chat with us. Look at this, you guys. This is amazing. I love it when the artist is here. Okay, now the first thing, Tyler, that I'm going to say about the piece is that I love the chaos. I love that this piece is so over the top. Because here's the thing, you guys. I much prefer in my classroom to see somebody who is like mega overdoing it, stuffing their piece with all kinds of things. And you know what? It's easy for me to come in and say, you know what? Take out this, cut back on that. That is so easy to critique artwork like that. Now, a lot of the times, though, when I'm working in the classroom with students, I'll have to say to them, you know what? You didn't do enough. I want to see more. And that's sort of hard criticism to give, because it's not very concrete. You're just saying do more, as opposed to say, hey, get rid of this one section, which is very concrete and easy for people to follow. So Tyler, I'm really happy that this is one of those pieces. I mean, I'm going to tell you that I do think it's too much, but I'm going to talk to you about ways that I think you could retain the feeling of chaos, but have the piece feel a little bit less haphazard, because right now you have so many different materials that, in my opinion, they're really fighting each other. And so you have to find some sort of logic to how you're going to organize this. So for example, one thing that can help you sometimes is to just think about the color of the objects, okay? Because you have so many different colors. Like, you have the reflective surface of aluminum foil, you've got these like googly eyes around the mouth, the actual paper mache mask is white. And so actually for me, the part of the piece that I think jumps out too much is the paper mache face, because everything else is super, super colorful. And I would be fine with that, except that the face just feels so stark white. And I think the issue is that the face is really the connecting form. Like, if you take the face out, you have nothing. Nothing's connected. Everything is springing out of that face. And so you have to think about this face as really being the glue for your sculpture. And the thing is, the glue for your sculpture right now is sticking out too much. Like, picture this. Like, if you had actually taken acrylic paint and maybe you had taken some of those colors, like the red and the blue and the green and everything, and maybe if you disperse them in the paper mache face, then there would be a little bit more of a transition. So actually, it's the face form that I actually have the most problem with, not just in terms of color, but also in terms of shape. Because think about it this way, you guys. If you look at the other sections, this is actually one of my favorite parts of the piece, where you're cutting up all these different pieces of colored paper, you're constructing them, you're doing some really cool things in here. It feels haphazard, but there's a sense of structure to it at the same time. And in some of these other areas where you're using like tissue paper and all these different textures and surfaces, that's really fantastic, okay? But the thing is, the face is the one part of the sculpture that is totally recognizable as an object, okay? You could say, looking at these, oh, those are leaves, but you're not totally sure. They're not that obvious. I suppose you have these birds, but they're very small. The face is gigantic. And so I guess what I'm saying, Tyler, is I'd like to see you push the abstraction a little bit more. The face, to me, is such a big distraction. It's actually, in some ways, the least interesting part of the piece. I think you're doing way cooler things in some of the other sections. Ethan M. says, do you think photographing the 3D work, bringing it into Photoshop and editing it is a good practice? You should always do that. I mean, you really would have to be incredibly good at photography to not do any Photoshop. And even the people I know who are incredibly good at shooting those images. They all do Photoshop. All the professional photographers I know that document artwork, they all do that. There's no shame in doing that. But I will tell you guys, though, it is really worth getting a good photo, because oftentimes what I see is people get lazy about photographing stuff. They say, oh, I'll Photoshop it later. It'll be fine. It is so much more work, you guys, to fix it in Photoshop than to just take a good photo. Because if you take a good photo, you can fix it in Photoshop in like 5 minutes, maybe even less than that. But if you do a bad job and then, oh, you gotta clone stamp everything and you gotta mask this part out, it can take forever. And even the people who are very good at Photoshop, it's time consuming. So I would just say, you guys, when you photograph your work, take the time. You're actually saving yourself a lot of grief. You get good lighting, you get a good backdrop, you take tons and tons of photos so you can edit out the bad ones. It really, really, I think, is worth the time. Okay, so getting back to Tyler's piece, let me tell you, Tyler, the piece of your project that I really, really like a lot is the googly eye lips. That is an area that I think is very exciting. Now, here's why. Number one, it treats the papier-mâché face as a supporting structure. So you don't see the face anymore, okay? The other thing is that there's a shift in scale. So it's all googly eyes, but all the googly eyes are different sizes. And so there's a lot of variation. It's very textured. And also it really seems to crawl around the surface. There are other parts of your piece, they really just look stuck on. Like, does everybody see that big triangle on the forehead? That to me doesn't really have much of a relationship. It just looks like somebody slapped it on. The googly eyes really feel like they're part of the form. I mean, they almost make me think about when you see barnacles on a rock. I mean, they almost look like they're growing out of that surface. And so I believe that connection. I think that is a really, really nice piece. Tyler says, I agree. I definitely did not spend much time on the face aspect compared to the parts around it. Yeah, it's tricky because, you know, Tyler, you're trying to balance so many pieces and parts that I understand that it's so easy to get caught up in all these different types of things, but spend more time on it. And honestly, Tyler, I would continue working on this. There are some pieces I review where I say, you know what, it's not worth it, start anew, but this is worth working on. I think that it would be wonderful to see you keep working on it and developing and really reacting to the materials. So here's another area you could get a very good transition. Does everybody see, I think it's like a photo of metallic gears. It looks like some photo of a clock interior. And then on the right-hand side, there's like gold foil and aluminum foil. So if you think about those two areas, they're somewhat similar because they're metallic-y looking objects. So why not take that photo of those metal gears and crinkle it up, rip it up, and maybe disperse it amongst the aluminum foil? I sort of feel like, Tyler, the way I would describe this, it's almost like, in my opinion, your piece is pancake batter, which has not been mixed all the way. It's like mixing pancake batter and there's just giant clumps of flour in it. So it's not that you didn't do a good job. It's just you didn't go far enough. And that's what I would definitely try to push. Neil is saying, is using a cell phone enough for photographing artwork? It depends on your phone. Some of the phones I think are probably not so great. But I can tell you guys, when I got my iPhone 10, I definitely saw a difference in the camera. And that was the first phone where it was like, wow, that's a really nice photo for a phone. And I imagine that the phones that are newer than the iPhone 10 are probably even better. So I would say iPhone 10 and above, you're probably fine. But lighting makes a big difference. If you guys have crappy lighting, you got a great phone, doesn't matter. So it's the whole package. You got to make sure that you have everything taken care of. Lisa H is saying the circuit board is the brains. Tyler saying it is the brain. Okay, cool. And Annie Helgelson says, I love the adapter coming out of the nose. It's cool to see such a mundane everyday object take on a new meaning in this context. Geez, I didn't even see that. Oh, yeah. So, okay, Tyler, that's a color thing because you've placed a white object over another white object. It's going to get swallowed. Like, that's such a cool moment. And I didn't even see it. So you really have to think about how are these things looking in relation to each other? don't just make the face and say, ooh, that looks good. You have to see, how does the face relate to the aluminum foil? How does the pipe cleaner relate to the googly eyes? And another section I would really think about, let's take a look at another view, is the stuff that's hanging down from the lips. That is a really good opportunity, but you gotta push it a lot further. My feeling right now is that it just looks like somebody tossed string on there. I mean, what if you took the string and you had googly eyes coming down with it so that maybe the googly eyes travel down the string? Really what I think it is, Tyler, is you got to work on transitions. How do you get from one part of the piece to the next? And then how do they relate to each other? Because you got too many pieces and parts and they're not relating right now. Tyler is saying the gears are real. They look like a photo in the pictures I took. Oh, well, you know what I would do then? I would smash them up. I think that would be really fun. And it'd actually be really cool if you got old computer parts and smashed them up with a hammer and just went at it. I think that would be really, really awesome. Now, another thing I would consider also, the base is driving me crazy because this is very, very common for a lot of people. They never think about the base. It's all about the sculpture. But the thing is, in sculpture, you have to think about the base because honestly, if your base is not considered, it really can make or break the piece. Like, I went to school with this person who sculpted this beautiful figurative sculpture. Okay, so it was a very serene looking figure. It was a male figure and it didn't have any legs because that's where the pedestal came in. And what they ended up doing was making this huge sculpture pedestal. And I'm not joking, it was shaped like a garbage can. And so you have this like beautiful, elegant figure and it's like on a garbage. It looked terrible. I was like, what are you thinking? And I know it's because they didn't think about it until the very last minute. And by then it was sort of too late to really design the pedestal. So what I would say, Tyler, is, and for anybody who's working three-dimensionally, plan the pedestal or whatever's holding it up while you plan the piece. Because this is so obviously, to me, a stand. It's purely functional. If you look at that black, number one, it's absorbing a lot of the colors. Number two, why a rectangle? A rectangle to me doesn't make any sense because it's such a chaotic sculpture. And a rectangle is about as boring and as stable as you can get. And so I think you would be a lot better off either not having the black base at all or doing something that is a crazy chaotic shape. I think that would fit a lot better. Builder D is saying, if the backing was white like the face, would that make the face disappear to the background and all the objects a step forward? It could. I mean, I'm not a fan of the face staying white, so there's another factor to deal with. But I think the point is that you just can't not think about the base because it really becomes a problem for a lot of people. Let's see. Luis Oyola says, your channel has inspired me to start drawing again. Thank you for making these videos accessible for everyone that wants to grow as an artist. Well, thank you so much and welcome to the Art Prof family, Luis. Lisa H is saying, how about doing a series of masks, but each only some of these objects? That would be great too. I think that's a really, really good idea. Now, Tyler, I want to show you a couple of artists who I think would be great for you to look at. The first one is Tim Hawkinson. And the reason I want you to look at his work is because he's a really prolific artist. He works with everything. Like, there are some sculptors who, they specialize in clay, or this person only works with metal. I feel like I look at Tim Hawkinson's work and you just never know what he's going to work with. And so he's such an interesting artist because some of his pieces are also kinetic. Like this one actually moves. So if you guys look up Tim Hawkinson, he's such a interesting artist. But the thing is, there is somewhat of a chaotic logic to the way that he does things. So you might actually do better, I think, maybe limiting some of the things, or as Lisa's saying, get that energy out by doing many pieces instead of feeling like you got to stuff everything into one piece, because then I think it becomes very confusing. Now, another person you could look at is this contemporary artist, Peta Coyne. Now, her work is also different media, but if you look at it, there's a more cohesive look to it. I think a lot of her work has wax and wire and a lot of different things, but there is a cohesion to it in terms of color. And I think that she's really reaped the rewards of that. Like, for example, this sculpture is white that has little tints of gray and yellow. And so because the color is pretty simple, you can see the form is super complicated. You can do that. And so it's balanced. It's like if you have super complicated color and super complicated form, we're lost. It's going to be really hard for us to understand that. So she's a good person to look at, I think, for cohesion. Let's see. Slops McGee says, I think not having a backing at all would be cool. Have it stand up vertically and have the face like a sphere and all the items shooting out in different directions. Good suggestion. Tyler saying, I'll definitely reconsider the background. It's a last minute choice so I could hang the piece on the wall. Okay, well, you know what I would take a look at as well is we do have this tutorial that actually there's a section that sort of looks like your piece. So this is a tutorial we have on building chipboard sculptures. And you might want to try something like this, Tyler, because I'd be very interested to see what you would do if you only had one material, just as a completely opposite response to the piece that you're making. Because I think that you do have to work harder when it's a single object, because it's not as glamorous. You have to do more with the form. And so maybe if you do a project like this and then you go back to all the mixed media, might get you to think about those relationships better. I think some essential design concepts would be good. And then the other thought I had, Tyler, instead of doing the paper mache mask, why don't you sculpt a face? Because, how many people here have sculpted a face? It is like the biggest power trip on the planet. I love it. So we have a portrait sculpture tutorial and I use air dry clay in it. You guys can use whatever you want. I mean, you can use Sculpey or something like that. But I really think you would have so much fun. And I think you'd have more options. I think when you're doing paper mache and it's on your face, there's only so many things you can do. But in clay, you can do way, way more. If you guys would like to submit your own artwork, please go to artprof.org, click on critiques. These critiques that we do here are free. And we don't have a huge number of slots each month, but we love seeing all the submissions. So please think about submitting when you get a chance. Okay, we have a third artist. Her name is Mallory Waldinsperger. I hope I'm saying that correctly. And I'm really excited about this piece because we've never critiqued an embroidery and textile artwork here. So I'm hoping that by showing this, people will see that, yes, we really look at everything. I think sometimes because somebody hasn't seen something, they think we won't critique it, but we really critique everything. I mean, we critiqued an animation piece a little ways back. We have looked at installation pieces. We've looked at furniture design. So we really do all of it. So let's hear about Mallory's artist statement. It's in the video description below. She's also on Instagram. She says she's been exploring embroidery and textile work. Doesn't have any formal training, but she's learned from embroidery artists online and could discover what they wanted to do. Landscape pieces, a method that sometimes resembles paint strokes, otherwise known as, quote, thread painting. So she also says that she also used needle felting in the clouds to add an extra layer of dimension. And she made this piece last year. It was the first piece that Mallory was commissioned to do. It's now one of their favorites. And Mallory says that the references for the piece were photos and videos from her friend's trip to Iceland. And she's trying to make the piece seem really large and peaceful, show movement through the clouds and reflections, and that she uses embroidery as a way to relieve stress. So they're trying to evoke pleasant emotions through their landscapes. Okay, very cool. Keith Larson is saying, wow, not your grandma's embroidery. Yeah, I mean, I feel that all genres and materials, I think to a certain degree, have these stereotypes that we have with particular materials. And I get really excited when people just bash those away because it's great to see the flexibility that every single material really has. Let's get up close and really look at the embroidery. What I really like about this Mallory is the density of it, because I'm not an embroidery artist. I don't know anything about the technique at all, so I'm not going to be able to make comments on that. But there's definitely a richness to this that I think is a lot denser and a lot heavier looking than what I typically associate with embroidery. And so I don't know how many layers are actually in this piece, but I get the feeling looking at the close ups that there's way more than just one layer. It seems like it's really just like packed with that. And so there's almost a muscular quality to this piece that I'm really, really enjoying. And I'm even wondering if we need to take a more extreme point of view on that. So, one thing that I would consider if we take a closer look at the clouds, first of all, I love that there's needle felting in here because it blends beautifully with the embroidery thread. I think one of the things that's really hard when you work with mixed media, and we talked about this in Tyler's piece, how challenging it is to get different materials to feel that they belong together. And in this context, you've made them really sink into each other very successfully. I mean, I do wish that maybe you had played more with the edges of the clouds. Like when you look at clouds, the edges of clouds, they're never really that well defined. Some of them are, like some sections will be very crisp and defined, but other areas you almost see the cloud dissolving in front of you. And I feel like looking at this piece that the way the clouds are portrayed, they almost look more like an idea of what you think clouds look like, as opposed to clouds, what clouds really look like in real life. And so I think I'd be very careful about that because there are a lot of images like that where people just think, oh, a frog, frogs look like this. But then the funny thing is that if you go to a zoo and you look at frogs, you realize they don't look like that. Like I really had no idea what a real frog looked like. There was this one time, actually, I went to the Mystic Aquarium in Connecticut, and I'm not joking. We saw a bullfrog there that looked like a big pile of poop. And I just thought, this is the coolest frog I have ever seen. I would never have thought to ever draw a frog like that. And I mean, I still have such a crystal clear memory of that frog. And so that's what I'm saying is that I think you have to look more carefully at what that is. I don't know what the reference photos look like. I mean, it could be that maybe the reference images you had were maybe not specific enough, but nobody says you have to stick with that. I mean, you can mess with it a little bit. I think the thing about reference photos, you want to use them, but you don't want to be too loyal. You want to feel that you can depart from that and manipulate and change things a lot more. Builder D is saying balance of needle felting and embroidery is quite a nice texture contrast. And Isa Davis is saying this is beautiful. I want it on my wall. And Emily Wilkins says, I like how they've used a change in direction of the stitches in the island to give it more weight and a contrasting presence to the sea and the sky. Yeah, I mean, I love how it's these like radiating lines that are so powerful and strong. And then the way these shapes just cut right through it, that's a really beautiful balance. Now, I do find myself more attracted to the upper right-hand section. And I think it's largely because that's where the most dramatic color change happens. It's like really, really dark ultramarine blue. And then it turns into that bright highlight that's in the middle. I do think more could be done in the ocean, though. I feel like the ocean is just this flat blue all over. I mean, maybe you could work in some very, very subtle greens, or maybe just make it undulate a little bit more. I feel like that is the part of the piece that, to me, it just feels very, very flat. And so I'm craving, I think, more dimension in that area. Annie Helgeson says, I think the directionality is very effective at directing the eye, but it'd also be cool to see more variation and subtle direction shifts. Okay, now here's one thing. I don't know how embroidery thread works, but I think it might be interesting if you had embroidery thread of different thicknesses. So if you had some, like maybe you peeled it apart and made it very thin in some areas, make it a little bit thicker, because I think overall, what I want in this piece is just more variation, because it's a great start. And I think that the foundation is there. It's just that in the water section, once we've seen that light blue, we've seen it all. There's no more to look forward to in that area. It's all covered. And another thought is just to not be so literal about the colors. I mean, so many people, oh, sky is blue. Yes, that's fun. But think about other ways that maybe you could push that a little bit further. Damara Carpenter says, it looks like a view from someone flying toward the island super quickly. Yeah, so maybe pushing the sense of movement in the piece could maybe make it a little bit more unusual looking. I just feel like the technique is really cool and I love the mixed media, but as a piece, it's a little bit safe. And I want you to start to really push some of that stuff. So I have two embroidery artists that I would like to show you guys who I think would be great inspiration for you. So these are two contemporary artists, and this is Anna Teresa Barboza. And I think that she would be a great artist to look at because she's somebody who really is totally outside the embroidery hoop. I mean, it's almost like the embroidery grew a life of its own and it's like starting to branch out into these other areas. I know traditionally speaking, people stay inside the hoop, but who says you have to do that? And who says you got to stick to one hoop? I mean, wouldn't it be really cool if you had, I don't know, 5 hoops and they were all different sizes and you wove them together? So it's almost like, I guess what I'm saying is to think about the embroidery hoop and the cloth surface as less of a surface and more as an object, because that's really what this is. This is not the same thing as a painting. Like when I look at a painting, I really think about it almost as a window into another world, but this is not that. This is an object. And so that's what I think this artist, Anna Teresa Barboza, is doing, that she starts in the hoop, but then she meanders, and then we have this other chaotic motion that starts to bring it down. So this one's somewhat similar because we have a fairly realistic scene of the ocean, but then isn't it amazing the way things just totally break down at the bottom? And then she actually leaves the fabric on the back that falls down, and that has a really gorgeous movement. So take a look at her work. Some of the pieces, I think, are more abstract or less abstract. Like this piece to me is not as interesting because I feel like the bird is so literal, but I do love the texture. So I guess what I'm trying to say, Mallory, is to be thinking more as a sculptor, because that is a different mindset. And I don't know anything about the world of embroidery. Maybe if I knew something, I'd think about it more like that. But because I'm not an embroidery artist, I see it as an object for you to physically engage with. Builder D says, I never thought of embroidery as actually sculpture. It's interesting. And Damara says, I love that ocean spilling out. Yeah, and here's another artist who I think is even more extreme because she does not have the embroidery hoop at all. This is Sophia Naret. I don't know how to say her last name, but her work is very, very detailed. You guys should look at her website. It's in the video description below. And it's a little hard to see in the slides, but she has actually figures in there. There's whole narrative scenes. And I think it's embroidery, but it's the same idea of this like tightly knitted, dense scene that then frays and turns into something else. So, I mean, this might sound almost sacrilegious, but I feel like actually what I would recommend, Mallory, maybe find an embroidery piece that you didn't like, and for some reason or other, you put it aside. I just know that when I was a kid, my mom always used to knit a lot, but she always had these like abandoned knitting projects. I feel like everybody who knits or makes anything has stuff like that lying around. So you find an embroidery piece that you don't really care about and just like play with it, cut it up, glue things together. And just, I think you need to have an embroidery piece that you're not precious about, that you can just experiment with. Because clearly, when we look at Mallory's work, technique is not an issue. I mean, you're totally set in that area. It's just, how do you distinguish yourself from, say, all the other embroidery artists who are out there? And I think that could certainly be one that you could work with. Slow Turtle says, sometimes she presents the back of her embroideries instead, which can show more movement. Yeah, and then the other thought, I mean, if I were doing this, I feel like what I would do, actually, this is a good example. I have these two rolls of tape. Like, if these are the embroidery hoops, like, what if you had them crossing over or going through or on top? I mean, then it's really sculptural, and then you can get crazy with it. So the thing is, Mallory, what I'm suggesting to you is probably so much more extreme than what you want to do. But it's sort of similar to what I was saying to Isabella earlier in the critique, that you have to heighten that. Make it so much more than you want it to be that it makes you really uncomfortable. And that's when you start getting to the good stuff. That's when it gets very exciting. And it's scary. A lot of people go, oh, I don't know. I don't know if this is what I want. Well, you got to just try it. And that's why I'm saying pick one that you don't care about, that you can mess with and not really worry about, because you obviously spent a lot of time on this. You would not want to do a two-piece like this, but definitely I think later on would be great. Oh, Mallory, you are in the chat with us. At least I think you are. I think that's you. Mallory CW says, awesome suggestions. I've never heard of these artists before. Yeah, check them out, because I mean, there's just so much that you can find online now. And I think it's really, really worth it to see what other people are up to. I mean, what I would do is just go on Instagram and just do hashtag embroidery art, embroidery sculpture, and just see what's going on, because it can be very inspiring just to see, wow, I don't have to stick inside that hoop. I can really start to do some other things. Oh, cool. It is you. Awesome. Wow, you guys, we had perfect attendance today. All three of our artists hung out with us. I really like that. Thank you guys so much for showing up. That's really fantastic that you're all here and listening to these critiques. Let's see. Harrison Ramel says, it seems very medieval. I like it. And Emily says it looks collage. And Erasmo is saying, oh, that's a lot of color. Cool. So anyway, you guys, I hope you will come hang out with me on Discord after this, because that is now an Art Prof tradition. After our live streams, we head on over to Discord, chat with you guys a little bit, catch up. It's also nice because sometimes people ask us questions in the chat and I can't get to them during the stream. I can do it on Discord. If you would like to join us there, the link is in the video description below. Please check out artprof.org. Lots of free stuff going on in there right now. And also, oh, you guys, this is super exciting. We just announced this today. You guys are going to have to check out what we have going, because we have a live stream event happening on June 7th. We're calling it the Art Prof 2020 graduation. So anybody here who is a graduating BFA and MFA student can enter and submit their work and be featured in this live stream. So check this out. It's on the front page, like I said, of artprof.org. Get that information, because really we wanted to do something for the seniors who really should have been having their degree exhibitions, but because of COVID-19 are missing that opportunity. So anybody who's in that situation, we would love to see you guys submit, subscribe to our channel, and join the Art Prof family. And thank you so much to our amazing Patreon supporters who make everything here at Art Prof possible. Thank you to all of you guys for your wonderful comments. Thank you to Isabella, Tyler, and Mallory for sharing your work with us. Everybody, please stay safe. I will see you next time. Bye.